if people misuse their freedom, the idea is not to take it away from them, but to better explain to them how they can better put their freedom to use. So that's what we should be doing.
Okay, so with all that said, how do you grade the Trump administration on their approaches? Because it's been kind of fascinating.
So this is Ben Shapiro asking Larry Elder what his thoughts are about ending the war on drugs and legalizing drugs, and which drugs would he legalize, which drugs wouldn't he legalize. February 24th, 2019, so this is over 2 years old. Larry Elder has been running for the governor of California for at least since February 24th, 2019.
Things that's been fascinating is watching as the Republican Party and conservatives more generally have moved in a more libertarian direction on a variety of issues. One of the issues where you were way ahead of the curve was on drug legalization. So where do you stand on drug legalization, particularly as we look at the heroin epidemic that's currently occurring? Do you think that drugs should be legalized as far as opioids? Where do you draw the line?
I've always felt that the drug problem, and there is a drug problem, should be dealt with as a public health problem, not a criminal justice problem. It's also a libertarian problem. If I want to destroy my body and put stuff in it, I own my body, not the state. I should have that right to do it. We ought to be counseling people about appropriate behavior and that sort of thing, but criminalizing something like this has always bothered me. So Milton Friedman felt the same way and made the same argument.
So the counter-argument kind of pushback, and I have to admit I'm very torn on this issue. On a libertarian level, I agree with you. The counter-argument I think is somewhat compelling, which is that there are obviously drugs like opioids that actually rob people of the capacity to reason. These are lifelong addictions, and so treating it as a public health problem as opposed to something that actually affects the ability to act in a libertarian way. Libertarianism assumes that people have the capacity to make reasonable decisions, and if you're basically allowing an enormous percentage of the population, or even any percentage of the population, to be turned into mental or reason-based invalids. They can't reason anymore. Is that a decent counter-argument to that?
I don't think so, because the downside is even worse. The drug epidemic has also caused an increase in street crime. It's been estimated that about 50% of street crime is directly or indirectly related to people robbing and maiming and stealing in order to get money for drugs. People going into prison, and you come out and you can't get a job now because...
greater creativity instead of, destruction and the harm of human and planetary life. So that's why I'm here. I'm feeling called to be a part of this journey in a very outspoken and courageous way, which is saying that I'm standing with California, and I'm here, and it's important to build bridges instead of continue to have the same consciousness of
because
division.
You've got a record, the amount of money that society loses because of the theft, the higher cost of insurance premiums because of all the theft related to drugs. There are lots of other unintended consequences because of this war on drugs. And so, no, even though some people will misuse their freedom, as they always will, the idea, Thomas Jefferson used to say, if people misuse their freedom, the idea is not to take it away from them, but to better explain to them how they can better put their freedom to use.
So there you go on the legalization. He didn't specifically say which drugs he would be for and which drugs he was not for, but he did say it's a public health issue. He's a libertarian on the issue. You have a right to your own body. And he agrees with Milton Friedman. It's economics. It's about economics to Larry Elder. You can't have a price floor or a price ceiling. By banning drugs, you've only increased its value on the market. So Milton Friedman was opposed to the war on drugs. And Milton Friedman actually says the war on drugs, he said the minimum wage is one of the worst things in the world for black folks. But the war on drugs, would probably affect black folks and maybe disproportionately. Not for sure, which would be a racial disparity. Right.
That's what we should be doing.
Okay, so with all that said, how do you grade the Trump administration on their approaches? Because it's been kind of fascinating. It's a big government administration. They've blown out the spending.
Right.
They've actually increased enforcement of drug issues. They've not been libertarian with regard to labor. So you mentioned earlier that you think that President Trump's crackdown on illegal immigration is good for black workers in the United States because you obviously don't have a greater supply depressing the wage base. On a libertarian basis, should we care about that? Should we care about,
Oh, yeah. I mean, Milton Friedman used to say you can't have open borders when you have a welfare state.
Well, that, right.
We've got a welfare state. And the average illegal alien, according to the Center for Immigration Studies, costs taxpayers over the course of the illegal alien's life about $80 grand. It seems to me we ought to have a say in that.
But putting aside the welfare state, if you're libertarian on labor, then the idea of additional supply lowering the wage base shouldn't really be a libertarian problem. Meaning it should be a problem if taxpayer dollars are being expended to support people. That's a libertarian problem, but it's not really a libertarian problem if people want to come here and work and then move around and then leave, should it?
Well, it is a libertarian problem because to me, you're not just bringing your work, you're also bringing your politics and your culture. And it seems to me that we have a right to determine who comes into our country, whether or not that person or persons feel the way we feel. Do they share our belief in a separation of church and state? Do they share our belief in a limited government? I don't want people who don't. I believe the reason borders are porous right now is because eventually these illegal aliens turned voters are going to pull the lever for the Democratic Party. If the Democrats believe that illegal aliens turned voters would pull the lever for the Republican Party, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We wouldn't be talking about statehood for Washington, D.C. We wouldn't be talking about allowing convicted felons to vote. All of these things breed more Democrats. We wouldn't be talking about college free tuition. If it weren't the case that the more likely it is you go to college, if you're studying humanities, the more likely it is you're going to come out more liberal than when you went in. If college meant that you were more likely to come out as a Republican or conservative, Democrats wouldn't be pushing this. So this is all about votes.
So on a libertarian basis, to go back to sort of the Trump question, if you had to grade President Trump, where would you grade him so far in his administration?
Compared to what? Compared to President Hillary Clinton, compared to President Larry Elder.
I mean, compared to, I assume that, I think we all have an objective standard in our head of how we would grade presidents. So, for example, you give George Washington an A, you give FDR an F, you give Ronald Reagan an A- or a B+. So, on that sort of scale, where do you put President Trump? So,
I'd probably give him about...
George Washington gets an F and FDR gets an A, Shapiro. You got that shit fucking wrong as fuck.
About an A-, maybe B+. Far better than I thought he was going to be. Far better. I don't like the tariff stuff, but it hasn't been as bad as I thought it was going to be. I do think that I underpaid attention to China and what China was doing in terms of stealing our technology, and it was right that somebody finally did something about that. I love the tax cuts. They should have been steeper. The idea that they eliminated state and local deduction and put a cap on mortgage interest deduction didn't help Larry Elder.